Welcome to We Might Be Nerds, a podcast where we talk about everything from tech to entertainment to history to science. I'm your host, Dylan Critchfield.
And I'm Kyle Montgomery.
And last week we covered the advancement of consumer technology since the year 2000, covering things like the rise of the MP3, the conversion to Blu-ray, the changes in display standards. And this week is going to be a little bit different. We have a couple guests, don't we, Kyle?
Yes, we do. We actually have my brother, Jake Montgomery.
Hey, how you guys doing?
And we have Dylan's brother, Taylor Critchfield.
Hello.
So, in regards to last week's episode, at the end there, Kyle, you and I talked about how we don't see television standards changing too much. 4K is pretty much here to stay and will, much like 1080p did, creep its way into homes, but we don't see 8K really becoming the standard. And we had a bit of news come up in the past week that kind of reinforces that point. Last week, due to some leaks mostly, Microsoft was forced to unveil the Xbox Series S and then later reveal also the price for the Series X. And today, Sony's unveiled, of course, the prices for both models of the PlayStation 5. But what I found interesting about those leaks is it kind of validated what we were saying last week. The Xbox Series S targeting 1080p, supposedly 1440p, but who has a TV that supports 1440p? I've never seen one, but
maybe someday.
Maybe someday, but I think it's interesting that they're targeting 1080p. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the console war. I think that's a discussion for another day. But this week, we're talking about prosumer products. And just kind of as a byproduct of the research we were doing, prosumerism as a concept. I sent you guys all the wiki article on prosumer and where it comes from, and I actually learned a lot from digging through that and looking through some of the links. Do you guys come up with anything new? Because our modern definition is for prosumer equipment is just a consumer product that might have professional grade gear, but that's just my exposure because most of my familiarity with the term prosumer is in terms of equipment, whereas the modern definition is an amateur who purchases equipment with qualities or features suitable for professional use.
Yeah, I'm no expert. When I heard prosumer, I thought it just meant professional equipment being brought to a consumer market, when it turns out it's actually kind of the opposite. And once you learn the definition, you see how ubiquitous it is. Just consumers, just people like us making things like a podcast or anything else, any other means of production.
Yeah, when you look at what we assume to be the definition through context versus what the actual definition is, and you look back at the history, you can see how prosumerism and the concept of prosumer products really intermingle together. Because the original definition was defined the concept was defined mostly by, the blurring of roles between consumers and producers in times of economic strife, like the Great Depression, and more recently, the economic recession that was seen throughout the late aughts, early 2010s. The term, though, prosumer, was coined by a futurist named Alvin Toffler in his 1980 book, The Third Wave, where he predicted the technology would contribute to the merging of those roles, consumer and producer, but also the merging of consumers using such equipment in professional contexts. And we see that all over today. Any internet user-generated content falls into that category, I think, right?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Even just posting to Facebook. Because you're creating content other people are going to look at, and then Facebook is making money off the ads. So yeah, I just thought it was really interesting how broad the definition could be, but I always thought of it more as physical goods and not software, but I guess it does apply to both.
And I found that one of them that might be a little more, just slightly more relevant, or at least more obvious to me, is something more like Instagram, where you have something completely visual, where you're making your own content in that regard and presenting it pretty explicitly to whoever is willing to consume, and they might be inspired to make their own product out of it too. Facebook's a little less clear cut, but still they're both still social platforms, so they kind of accomplish basically the same thing. One's just more specific.
Yeah, I can definitely see where the lines are blurred between Facebook and Instagram versus things that we contemporarily consider prosumer, things like YouTube, Twitch, podcasting as a whole. Instagram I think fits our current modern description of it, but Facebook is definitely more of a textbook thing, because when we talk about modern prosumerism, the assumption is made that the person producing that content is benefiting from it in some way. With Instagram, they're either benefiting from exposure or sponsorships. You don't really get that kind of thing with, standard social media like Facebook or RIP MySpace or Twitter. Although Twitter, you can also have some endorsements of some variety. But most, in terms of like internet content, I think you could silo that into things like user-generated video. And commonly we see people use those platforms and turn that into a profession, but we also see that with actual products, right?
I think, like you were saying, I think the best, most direct thing you can think of is less Facebook. I think the most prevalent thing most people are familiar with would be Twitch streaming or YouTube video posting. I'm making something, putting it out there, hopefully to generate revenue, but it's also something that I'm in the same time consuming by watching content. So
yeah, but there's also more direct ways to generate revenue that are prosumer in nature. Etsy is a big marketplace now, and you see people producing stuff locally and selling it on like the Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, even on eBay. I really want to kind of get into the rise and how this all came to be as we know it today. What contributed to the landscape as we know it. So yeah, I would like to talk about like what would bring about those movements. Again, in times of economic crisis, it makes sense that these types of movements arise. DIY movements, self-help, because people don't have the financial means to just go out and buy something, so they're incentivized to do it themselves. Stuff like homesteading, people growing their own food is a form of prosumerism. And I think if we just look at history, it makes sense that prosumerism has become what it is today. In the Great Depression, people would have, I don't even know what people would have done in the Great Depression.
They say people making clothes from what they had, potato bags, scraps, modifying their cars. Like in Grapes of Wrath, they take a passenger car and turn it into a flatbed truck and making your own thing, getting by with what you got.
Right. Yeah, and I think it also, would apply to just keeping like upkeep on stuff like your clothes. Instead of going to a seamstress, you just do it yourself. Instead of going to like a carpenter, you just fix your own house, that sort of thing.
I think the terminology has certainly evolved in that aspect, because I do most of my own work on my car or my wife's van, and I feel like that is something that most people still seem to do, but most people aren't just trying to make their own house or do their own thing like that, especially in like construction or sewing or something like that. There are some people that usually take it on more as a hobby, but I don't usually see it as the only means of how to get a product. So I feel like the term has certainly evolved, especially now that the internet is prevalent in everything we do.
Yeah, but going back to the origins, something I'd need to research more, and probably will now, is looking at the habits of the general populace after the Industrial Revolution, before the Great Depression. That time between roughly the 1890s and then up into the 1930s, and see how that compares to the post-Depression era, because I'm fairly certain, and I'm saying this with no basis, but just on my understanding of history and where these movements came from, is that I'm pretty sure in that time frame, 1890 to 1930, everything was so highly specialized that you just went to a person to do that thing. You didn't, if you weren't in that industry or in that profession, you just didn't have the tools to do so. But when everything went to crap, places were out of business, people couldn't get a job, those materials, made their way into the populace. People figured out how to imitate those types of tools and use them for themselves. And then in the post-World War II era, that mindset just kind of took hold, and that's why we see a lot of things we do today. Also, things like gearheads, people doing their own car stuff and doing stuff for fun in the post-war boom, I think could have contributed a lot as well. I don't have any reference for that, but you guys feel like that time in the 60s and 70s where there was a lot of economic prosperity could have contributed to the trend in any way?
I think so, but what I was more intrigued by was, you're saying back everything was so specialized, highly specialized means of productions, and then when that all came crashing down, everybody had to get their own thing. Well, now we had the Great Recession of 2008, and now you have this internet, so all these companies are shutting down, and they're fire sailing. And before all these websites that you mentioned earlier, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, if a company was offloading equipment, just, fire sailing everything out, liquidating, they'd have, you'd have to go through channels. You'd have to be a wholesaler, you'd have to have an account. Now, a business goes out, I can look on Craigslist and they're selling their machinery, their equipment to everybody. If you have the assets, you can go, Joe Blow can go off the street and buy a milling machine, used. So you don't have to get one brand new from the manufacturer. And also with, in the 1930s, a milling machine would take up the size of the house. Now I can put a milling machine in my garage.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant. eBay is a big force in the modern prosumer marketplace. I mean, of course, that's the original, the OG, if you will. eBay popped up in the 90s and has, continued to innovate and keep itself relevant. And yeah, like you said, any of us could go and get professional equipment in whatever field of professional interest or hobbyist interest we want, and probably find something cheaper than from a business and get all those professional features. Another thing is like the rise of hobbyist technologies derived from professional equipment that someone bought, figured out how it works, and make a commoditized version of that. But yeah, stuff like you were saying with mills, you can buy, tabletop, maybe not good for large scale work, but like for small scale projects, you can get like tabletop mills, you can get small CNC routers, and all sorts of other stuff. But beyond that, you can, with the secondhand equipment, is very powerful because it's given rise to places like Etsy and individual artists who can make a living that way. The fact that a lot of that is born, again, of the 2008 recession, and it's interesting to watch, if a bit confounding at first. Like, I haven't personally used Etsy, so I don't have a frame of reference for like the quality of goods or anything, but from people I know who have bought stuff, they've always been very happy because people put a lot of effort into producing these goods.
I've also seen a little more specific of services that provide, prosumer kind of products. I start seeing that more with one called Reverb. And I'm more of an audio guy, so I'm really used to kind of looking out for audio equipment and just seeing, what's current and what people are kind of selling their equipment at like what price they're selling their equipment. Because that's what that service is. It's pretty much eBay, but just for audio equipment.
Yeah, there are a lot of specialty sites that pop up, and like from an artist standpoint, there are a lot of there's a lot of prosumer art gear stuff like drawing tablets or applications for low-end tablets to draw on that people use to produce artwork and sell online, and sites like Patreon, and where you can subscribe to a person's work or get extra content if they're producing somewhere. Or there's sites like I think it's Coffee, but it's spelled Kofi, where you can just tip someone for their work. Or you can go to, what's the one where you can contract someone to make something, Kyle? You're more familiar. Fiverr.
Fiverr.
Oh, Fiverr, yeah.
Yeah, where you can just look for anyone for any job. You can contract independent jobs to independent creators rather than having to go through a corporate entity. So, like, let's say I wanted to put an article online, but I wanted visual aid. I don't want to go to a stock photo company. I don't want to spend a ton of money on subscribing to, say, like Storyblocks or whatever for a video clip or a sound clip, where I have to stay subscribed to continue to have that license. So I can go and contract someone to act as like a hand model for what I could have gotten as a stock photo, but I want something that's more personal. I can pay the person directly. We have the license. We're good to go. That's
the middleman.
Yeah, cutting out the middleman is kind of what prosumerism's all about, as you think about it. And after this rise in demand for retired or discarded professional gear, we've started to see the availability of consumer-focused equipment with professional grade features. Case in point, I got this new mic because my audio is trash, but this is technically a piece of prosumer equipment. I have a blue Snowball, and it's consumer priced, but its electronics are built as such to give a professional voice quality at a very affordable price. And we see things like that. I'm an IT guy. There's a lot of networking equipment out there that is focused at consumers, but with a high degree of control that you normally only get in professional hardware. Stuff like VLANs and ACLs that you can go in and do at a very granular level. And it's led to the rise of things like the home lab movement, people hosting small server farms in their home. Speaking of that kind of stuff, like the consumer equipment that is kind of has those pro add-ons, what kind of stuff beyond what's kind of been said already are you guys familiar with that I might not have exposure to?
For any context, my background is in HVAC service, and we're starting to sell UV lamps that were originally designed for NASA. That's all their marketing says, NASA, blah, blah, blah. But, it was designed to disinfect rooms, to get clean rooms. And now they have it pared down so much, I just cut a 3-inch hole in the ductwork, stick this thing in, 24 volts, you got clean air.
So it's like a filtration or like a particulate trap?
It's a UV light that has a matrix filter kinda, and on that matrix, water molecules accumulate, and it actually causes. I'm not a chemist, but it causes it to turn into hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, on that matrix.
Huh.
And so it gets that other oxygen is a negative ion, so the negative ions help attract particulate, and that's technology that was developed for NASA, but now it's pared down to stuff you can use in your home. Still a little pricey. The bulbs themselves can cost a couple $100, and they need to be replaced every 2 years, but it's good stuff.
I think we see that technology that you're referring to in stuff like household air purifiers or air filters. Like we have one we got a few years ago because we live in the dusty country, where it's got a filter, and then it has an option to turn on a UV light to kill off a bunch of stuff. That's probably not the same tech, but similar use of UV lighting to sterilize and purify the air.
Yeah, and it's the same kind of thing. Yeah, like paring down technology is probably before, if not a space station, would be like relegated to like a hospital or like, a specific
Yeah,
factory that needed like super clean air.
Yeah, and so that's kind of funny though how that paring down of industrial equipment actually goes back to my original definition that I thought in my head.
yeah, and a lot of that stuff, doesn't. A lot of that stuff, like the air filter in question that I mentioned, that's general consumer tech. It's very common that we see highly specialized stuff become commoditized and used in consumer equipment. But the same is also very true for professional equipment. But some technologies and some innovations tend to stay in the professional space. That's what makes them pro. And seeing those in higher priced, still consumer focused products is what we're seeing a lot of today, and it enables a lot of really neat stuff. Especially, highly involved hobbyists are the ones who benefit from it the most. But I mean, we've been talking a lot about material products. Something I can hold and look at and utilize, or something that people can use to make with. Something we haven't touched on, and I know Taylor and Jake, you guys might not be as familiar, but Kyle and I are fairly familiar with open source software. That's a prime example of prosumerism, by both definitions, the modern and the sort of original. It's software that is developed collaboratively by professionals, amateurs, activists, and with the express intent of being open, being able to be tuned by anyone. You have the source code. When you have a software source code, if you know how to code, you can add features or modify that software to your personal needs. But also the idea of it, generally speaking, being free. And it acts as both a means for prosumerism. People who are not professional programmers can get involved in a programming project, but it also tend to produce a lot of prosumer software. Case in point, I'm going to edit this episode in Audacity, which is probably one of the pieces of open source software that a lot of people are familiar with. And I mean, if you listen to any other podcast besides this, you've probably heard a host talk about, hey, I'm going to do this in Audacity. And Audacity is completely free, and it's a very powerful piece of audio editing software. And another piece of software I'm using right now to record this is OBS, the Open Broadcast software.
Yeah, and you're talking about like open source software, and that, it does tie into another prosumer technology, 3D printing. It's a lot of designs, and I mean, there's like a myriad of websites that host like people designing and tweaking with like stuff you can just download for free and make like, I don't know, there's probably billions of things online you can download and make with a 3D printer.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of different types of materials you can use as well, but something that most people might not know, 3D printers are a completely open source technology. The very foundation of the technology was open sourced by the guy who created it, whose name I am going to Google right now. So Charles Hull invented the concept of 3D printing stereolithography. So when you 3D print something, you have a piece of software that basically takes a 3D model and slices it up into a bunch of 2D images of a certain height, and then uses a CNC controlled head to lay down a layer, and then it pumps the nozzle up a set amount, and then lays down the next layer. So because of him, we now have this basically home mass production capability, because like you were saying, Jake, there are so many open source models, or at least freely available models that anybody can download and print. I have a hanger for my headphones that I was able to download and print. People design replacement for car parts and make them out of a strong enough material to use in their own vehicles, and it's useful for rapid prototyping, and it's consumer enabling, and it's individual enabling, which I think is really strong. it's really powerful. But something we wanted to jump back to on open source software and touching in on that a little bit more. The backbone of the internet basically runs on open source. Most Linux is not big as a desktop operating system. You may have heard of it before, but Linux, the operating system, is so malleable that it is the backbone for a lot of I'd say lower level equipment, stuff like network switches, any smart device you have, I guarantee you is powered by Linux. Android is powered by Linux. That might be something you're more familiar with. But the fact that it was made by a guy, made freely available, and then a whole bunch of just regular people who happened to know programming contributed to it and made it this massive hobbyist force that also powers a lot of the enterprise infrastructure in our world today. That's straight up mind-blowing.
It is pretty mind-blowing. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about like the downside of being able to 3D print a part for your car. You know, this prosumerism is beautiful, but where does the regulation come in? If I can 3D print a part, what if I don't have the know-how to have it within safety tolerances? You know, if prosumers are going and buying up all this expert equipment, but they don't have, they just use the whole prosumer economy to gather their equipment, get their education. I'm just using my backing as an HVAC technician. I can go to a pawn shop and buy a set of gauges, a multimeter, and a drill, and I can say I'm an HVAC guy. Where we live in Illinois, there's not that much certification except your EPA. So I think it can be dangerous. I think it's interesting to see where it goes.
I think that's largely covered already by laws and regulations we have in place. For a lot of things, especially when it comes to stuff like HVAC, you have to have a legal license to do so, or you have to be represented by a business. It's one thing if you're doing it, quote, professionally, and another if you're doing it in the name of a business. Businesses have regulations they have to abide by, which I think really mitigates a lot of the concern you addressed there. And let's be honest, anyone who's involved in 3D printing, for the most part, is a highly involved hobbyist of some variety, and they're typically knowledgeable enough in whatever they're using the 3D printer to produce to keep safety tolerances in mind. And most of what I've seen is, stuff like small hoses or connectors, stuff that's like just really a pain in the butt to find somewhere, or like maybe a replacement for the shroud for your lights. But also I've seen them. I don't know if you guys saw this, but the Air Force, they have these cups that they use in their planes. The handles kept breaking. So the Air Force turned to 3D printing to replace these handles as bolt-on replacements because the company that made them either wouldn't supply them or wanted too much for them. Which, I mean, in the lack of an affordable product, being able to produce something of your own, that it is powerful, but I can see where a person would be concerned with regulatory issues. But the big ones have been addressed already, mostly in regards to like 3D printing a firearm, stuff that's like obviously problematic.
Right. Yeah. I was gonna bring up that, but yeah, I know that's already been kind of squashed.
Yeah. Sorry. It might be the contrarian in me just bringing that up. It's just also you want to be aware of what it's great to support people and support small businesses and all that, but it's just hard you got to draw the line between supporting a small business and someone that you know and making sure you're getting the proper work done that you need, or you're getting your needs met as well in a safe and effective manner.
Yeah, I think where licensing and laws don't cover that, I think for the most part, experience of something like, and horror stories like cover the rest of that. Not that that's a positive thing in any way, shape, or form, but like there are some things where I should go to a professional, and the chances are, if you're going to someone personally to do something for you, they've earned the level of confidence because they can do it right. Economic circumstances notwithstanding.
Is that a little libertarian I'm hearing then? Let the free market decide?
No. It's more of like a person's personal economic capabilities aside. Like, if I'm broke and I just need my car to run, I don't necessarily care about safety, I just want the thing to work. There's definitely lines there, and that's more what I was trying to address.
Okay.
Yeah, versus like, hey, my car's working, it's fixed. I'm a used car dealer, but there's all these,
No.
Manufacturer, like recommended parts in there. Yeah, I get it.
And I think it's one thing to have a hobby, but it's another thing to try to turn your hobby into a profession. And that takes more than just saying, hey, I'm good at something, I'm going to start selling my products. It's wonderful to actually have these prosumer technologies, because it at least is an open door to turn your hobby into a profession in a way that there used to never be. You didn't have 3D printers, you didn't have CNC machines, at least at this kind of price point and availability.
Scale.
It's really cool to see that you can take something that you would consider a hobby, something you can nerd out about, and turn it into something that really can actually make money. But that is going to take regulations, is going to take training. It's going to take more than just putting your stuff online. And whenever you put your stuff online, other people need to also be aware of what you're doing. They're going to want to know that you are licensed to do the work that you're going to be doing.
I don't think licensing is a big deal on this, because if you're going to be doing something in a professional context, for most professions, you already need a license to operate in most states. I don't think that's a concern. But what I think is more so from going from hobbyist to professional is just the ability of the person who might have, say, a 3D printer because they're interested in one thing, and being able to adapt that, or any piece of prosumer technology in general, into just a general DIY hobby. Being able to do anything yourself is empowering to the individual, and having that feeling of not being reliant as much on a professional to do something. That's really cool that we have that now. But even then, when you're doing that, anybody who's doing that should have the sense of, I can do this, or I need to go to a professional. But then again, Dunning-Kruger effect, some people will definitely think, hey, I've gotten to this point, and then blow something up.
Yep, the word is hope.
The word is hope.
Well, and I think that's another good thing about the internet is you do have all these counterbalances. You have your Yelps, you have your Google reviews. If I look someone up, I look up their business, I can see what the community is saying about them. I don't have to know that they know Tom, Dick, and Jerry down the street. Yeah. I can look online and say, okay, this guy does know his stuff. He has all these reputable people. He has all these people backing him saying he's reputable.
Again, you're talking about businesses and stuff. That doesn't apply to individuals, and I don't think that applies to prosumerism as a whole. Like, I think that's completely off topic.
Like, if you're going to like Etsy though, like the biggest marketing is like, please review my product, and you always like, anyone's bought a couple things, and it always will say in there like, please give me 5 stars or whatever it is on Etsy, because that helps. If they get 5 stars and like so many people, that kind of helps get them away from the myriad of other similar products.
You actually get viewed.
On the flip side, if you're actually, eBay has the same system in place, and that's actually a proven system. The rating system works, and you can filter those products by how highly rated someone is, and it's by having a review system like that in a marketplace like Etsy, it is self-regulating. If someone gets a crap product, they're going to give you a crap review, and that's their right. Their consumer protection is very much built into that. And in eBay, you have the reputation system that says, hey, buyer beware, these guys have I don't know when they put this in, but you have your overall reputability, and I think I may be mistaken, but they're also showing recent reputability in case like someone took over an account or whatever. Consumer protection I don't really think is a concern as long as the marketplaces, you have an avenue to review it. Like I'm cool with places with Etsy because you have that review system, and I would go to a place like that rather than Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or anything like that, because at least with Etsy or eBay, I can look at a review metric and say, this person's going to give me something good. This person's probably going to sell me a knockoff or something that's cheap.
And they're trying to actively keep their account in good standing on there instead of just being some anonymous person.
Yeah, the marketplaces, those platforms have the regulations built in for a reason, and they do a pretty good job. It's really cool to see, because like, here's something I hadn't considered, like, and it's again something I'm gonna have to read on. The tools we have, like, Jake, you're remodeling your bathroom right now, right?
Correct.
You've got some specialized tools that you need to do that job. You're able to do that because you could buy those tools, at a hardware store. I'd be interested to look and see at what point in time those types of equipment became available, because you think about it, anything you buy at Lowe's that's not an appliance basically fits the bill for what we're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, or at least you could apply it in a way that fits the bill to what we're talking about. No, I'm not sure when that started, like the big box hardware store versus mom and pop that didn't have everything in stock. So
yeah, and or like even the mom and pop stores, when did this stuff become like commercially available for just consumers? Did it start from construction companies offloading their stuff? And I think it's important for us to note that there's two separate kind of things that we haven't really separated in this conversation. Is that you have the people who are doing stuff as a do-it-yourselfer and a hobbyist, and let's be honest, most people who are doing it, most people who are involved in prosumerism are doing it as a hobby. I'd say maybe it's a 70-30 split, hobbyist versus people who are actually making a living of some sort with the capabilities we have today. Look no further than YouTube. How many YouTube creators are there out there versus people who actually make money? A lot of people started YouTube as a hobby and still do as a hobby to this day, not trying to make any money. I do this as a hobby because I think it's fun to have these discussions. And again, like, you've got all those tools to do your bathroom or whatever you want to do around the house, but you're not planning on selling that to anybody. You're doing that for you, and it empowers you as an individual to take control of your situation a little bit more. And I think that's the most powerful thing at all about the prosumer marketplace, is if I see a need and there's something that I can buy that helps me do it myself rather than have to pay someone $200-300 to do it for me, and the internet enables me even further by providing me an instructional video or guide of some sort. That's what living in the future is to me.
So what I took from that is we're not getting paid for being on here.
Priority, I think he's being more. My priority is this is a hobby. If I get paid, whatever.
Yeah. No. I think
Taylor's
that really
changes
what I was saying earlier. Hey, Casper, hit me up. My back is sore every night. No, I think that really does change my view. I was looking at that real cynical. That's just because the lens I look through is that's my livelihood, is going and doing these things that are now being done through prosumerism. So I was seeing that on the people using it as their income. But now that you say, most of it is hobby based, that does make it seem a lot more neat. I'm not as apprehensive about the whole concept and movement.
I also see it on the other side of the coin. If you're already a professional at something, or are a self-made professional who is able to work from home, you can also turn that around and make a YouTube channel to become the teacher.
Yeah.
And even then, you could make something off of that. You're producing a product from being able to produce a product. You're doubling up essentially on your skills and giving yourself more of an opportunity to continue to cut out the middleman for someone else.
Yeah, that creates a positive feedback loop. I learned something, like, full disclosure, I'm an IT professional. I learned more from YouTube and the internet than I did through any of my schooling or professional training before I actually got into the field and got hands-on experience. But what you're talking about, Kyle, that creates a feedback loop. One person learns how to 3D print from one guy who's a hardcore engineer. And he gets really into it, but he wants to specialize. He wants to use it for a different purpose. He wants to do D&D minis or something that enables his hobbies. He gets that and learns how to do that and kind of irons out that process. He turns around, makes a YouTube channel about using 3D printing in that context. And you can apply that to any sort of blend of skill sets meets interests, and you develop a niche video channel for anybody who's looking to do the same thing, and that gets you views, and then those people might go ahead and further recontextualize those for other use cases. We live in an age where the average person has more practical knowledge about such a wide variety of products than at any other time in history. You look at anybody who's even remotely involved in the internet and self-started learning, and they're basically a jack of trades. Hell, I would bet that each of us knows someone who has a wide enough generalized knowledge base that I could kick them back in time to the 1950s, and they would re-pioneer, quote, innovations in 6 different fields because of the knowledge they have that they were able to learn through the communities that we have today.
It's just so much more accessible. That's really the thing. This specialization is turned into becoming more of a jack of all trades.
Yeah, and if you can make money being a jack of trades, that's cool. But to your point on Etsy, Taylor, and the discussion of the hobbyist versus the prosumer pseudo professional, a lot of folks just sell on Etsy as a hobby, as like, I enjoy doing this. I don't have anybody, like, I want to make these things because I like making them, but I've already given one to everybody I know, so if someone wants to pick them up, it's just a bit of extra money for me. I feel like that's a lot of what Etsy is. Again, it's like any online thing. There's a very small percentage of people who are actually doing it for a living, but it's cool that they can make some side cash from doing that. And, we live in a world powered largely now by the gig economy, so that people can, like, would you consider Uber kind of a prosumer thing?
It was in the
Taylor?
Wikipedia. Airbnb and Uber was, but yeah.
I think that's just them using a buzzword for marketing. Because, like you said, I think you're right. I think most people that participate in prosumerism, I think it is mostly hobbyist. But what you see when you look it up is, media goes where the money is. So if you look up prosumerism, everything is all your results are, here's how you become a prosumer partner with us. Here's how we're working with prosumers. So that puts me in the mindset of it's more of a professional thing. But I think you're right. In reality, I bet the whole movement is more hobbyist based.
Yeah, at the very least, if people are making their living solely on prosumerism, I feel like a lot of people are doing it through a variety of different channels. Like, you might make some stuff for Etsy, make a bit of money there, and then the rest of the time you drive for Uber, or Lyft or any of those, because that all the gig economy stuff is just people doing stuff that everybody does for money. Which I don't know if that fits the definition of consumerism? What do you guys think?
I think it's a stretch, and then you
I
get
think it's kind of
into
a reversal, actually.
yeah, because you're having a big company using this technology to employ. I don't think it's like with Etsy.
That's a different
Yeah,
thing.
Etsy and eBay, they're a service that it's more commission based. But I think Uber is. I have my own opinions on it. I don't think we'll get into that
You
here.
drove for them, so you've got
For about a year, yeah. And it's,
so. On the flip side, I mean, I understand the concerns about regulations. Here's a bigger concern. I think that we can all agree on is that we have the sites like YouTube and Twitch and eBay that are basically super giants in providing that avenue between producer and consumer, or prosumer and consumer, as it were. And to a certain degree, those companies being too large to fail, I think, is problematic, just from a focus of control perspective. But at the same time, I'm seeing a lot more specialist sites pop up as well. Again, stuff like Fiverr or specific marketplaces for certain types of goods. Those pop up, such as the nature of the internet. But I don't see competitors to these sites popping up, and at least here in the US, if you want something that was previously professional equipment, you go to either eBay or Craigslist. If you want something that is handmade, you either look someone local or you go to Etsy. You want user generated video content, you want something that's not a demand that's not being met on TV or the streaming services, you go to YouTube. You want to watch people just do stuff live, Twitch. But those are the only places you can go to that. The only internet product that I can really think of that's avoided that problem is podcasting, because there are so many different hosting providers and directories that people can pick them up on, because that's how those things grew. But all the video sites disappeared once Google overtook YouTube and it became too big to fail. All the other streaming sites for things like games and other just conversations largely died out after Amazon bought Twitch. I think it happens in any industry where you eventually you have a bunch of places to do a thing or to serve a need, and they eventually all get absorbed into just a core few companies, or in the case of the internet, usually one company. Look at the amount of car companies that there were 40 years ago. How many do we have today? There's just a few. It happens with any industry, I think.
I think it's kind of ironic, though, the internet, which has provided this prosumerism and this giant boost to small business and do-it-yourselfness, is in itself monopolistic.
It's the problem is forming new marketplaces, and the problem there is the barrier to entry, because you need a lot of resources to host something like that. You need a lot of highly professional people to make that. But that said, I think we've covered the concept of prosumer equipment and prosumerism as a whole pretty exhaustively. I don't think we've really missed anything major. Other than stuff like consumer-focused software to cut out the middleman, stuff like TurboTax did originally. Again, I say originally, helping people do their taxes without having to go to somewhere else. Largely, that's not an issue anymore, because you can file your own taxes just through a government site. Is there anything you guys think we're missing? Anything you think we glossed over or didn't address?
I feel like we've at least covered the base enough. I mean, I don't think that there's anything glaring that we have missed.
Yeah, of course, we're not professionals on this topic. We're not historians on this topic. This is just something we find really interesting. So,
and this is our experiences with it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're interested in learning more about prosumerism, Google around a bit. Look at if you have a profession that maybe we haven't mentioned, or you're part of an industry that we haven't even mentioned, look around on eBay. See if there's equipment you use in your pro life that is just for sale there. One thing that actually brings up is a lot of small businesses run on the discarded equipment of the enterprise and industrial folks. That's neither here nor there. It has nothing to do with prosumerism, but it is worth noting, I think. And that keeps that equipment in the gives those pieces of equipment a new lease on life.
My question is necessarily, where do things go from here?
The forward-looking question.
Into the future we go.
I don't really have an answer for this.
I'm more or less wondering, is the equipment that is going to be quote-unquote prosumer equipment, is that going to change on us dramatically, or is the internet going to be the thing that changes first to make to be more capable to promote a model such as this?
Or will we see... I think a possibility is that I think we go one of two ways. Either the prosumer versions of products become the consumer version, and we just have a better baseline for a lot of things, or we see new innovations come into the professional space that take a lot longer to become readily available to the consumer / prosumer intentionally. Open source software isn't going anywhere. Stuff like that's not going anywhere. But I think when it comes to the new cool hot stuff that we see in professional equipment, I think we might see that start to take a lot longer to reach the masses, because it does hit the consumer space so quickly nowadays.
Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting, especially like, I don't know, with going forward, kind of having like this almost crowd sourcing of prosumerism. Like, I know during this COVID pandemic, early on there was a story about people 3D printing like clips for masks, and they were just like donating it. So I mean, it'd be interesting to go forward. Like, a company's like, we need 1 million of these, and we don't have like the physical like resources to make it, but we will pay all these different people to make like this simple part that they're using in their manufacturing. So I mean, I kind of see that. I don't know if that's really prosumerism, but just
It is, and I think that's a very good point. I'd totally forgotten about that, but yeah, I know there were a couple of tech tubers that I follow that were mass producing face masks, like the face shields,
right?
The plexi shields, or I think that's a very important point, because we are seeing a lot of stuff that is, hey, you can just buy raw materials and make stuff with that. And we don't have manufacturing here. We don't have mass manufacturing here in America like some other places have. Like, most of it's China, let's be honest, because that's where the mass production facilities are. But I do think we might see like collectives come up around certain hobbyist groups that are like, we're a collection of hobbyists, but if you have a need, we can make this stuff to order. We have the means. All we need is to pay you to pay us for our materials and time, and reimburse us, and then some. It's an extension of the gig economy in the way. 3D printing definitely deserves its own conversation. That's something I definitely want to dive deep on in the future, as I get more experience with it, and as it becomes more widely known, because there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. But even stuff like, I'm hoping with the marketplaces like Fiverr and the like that we see now, you'll see more of that in other spaces rather than just production of goods, production of content. I'd like to see that them take away some power from like TV studios and stuff. I'd like to, if we can get some alternate video platforms. I think there's definitely a space for a bunch of people to sign a petition. Hey, we want to see this variety of show that doesn't exist right now, and people can freelance, get together, and produce something like that. I know that sounds almost too optimistic, but I don't think it's unrealistic. There's a lot of talent out there. You see it all over.
And that's why that's something that has already somewhat existed, is local access television. That's something that I feel like would be a good translation for the platform, giving power to the people to be able to create their own content and actually have it broadcast. We're able to do that easily, but to actually have it done on a cable network or something like that is still fairly relegated to local access television, and it's getting harder to find. So actually being something like that, I could get behind that.
Yeah, because let's not kid ourselves. TV is dying. Traditional television is dying. Streaming is largely taken over, except for live events. But I don't know. Yeah, looking forward, I don't know the current state of like. I think there's room for more gig economies to pop up, and that to really become the norm for a lot of things. And I think that has its advantages and its disadvantages. Obviously, there are some problems with gig economy companies maybe not treating people as employees. But as far as availability of employment through channels like that and enabling people to teach themselves or to produce themselves, I think things look interesting, but I can't say whether they're good or bad.
The most interesting prosumer concept I've seen is this YouTube channel called AVE, stands for Arduino versus Evil. He's a Canadian industrial engineer, I believe is what his profession is. But the coolest thing he's done is he bought a CNC router mill machine. I don't know the proper nomenclature, but his Patreons can submit and vote for CNC designs, and he will actually mill them out and then test the product. And I think it's really interesting. He talks like he's in the shop, so there's some foul language and a lot of innuendo, but it's pretty entertaining and a pretty interesting concept.
I thought you meant like technical jargon, not he talks like he's in the
Yeah,
shop.
I thought you were talking about just technical jargon.
Can you say that name again for that channel real quick? Because that's something I'd be interested in. I think it makes a great recommendation of the week for us.
It's AVE, and it stands for Arduino versus Evil. His avatar is just a little blue flame on top of a microchip.
All right, so look that up on YouTube for sure. And I'd completely forgotten to mention Patreon. I know I'd been considering it when I was initially writing up our show notes, but yeah, Patreon does kind of create that the avenue for the kinds of things I was talking about, is giving an audience an avenue to communicate with the creator to say, hey, we want this produced. But I think it would be better if people could submit, hey, we have a need for this, and people could, like pitch to a group, and then, funding happens through Patreon, or like crowdsourcing is going to be a lot of the future, and I would love to see more crowdfunded plus crowdsourced things. I don't know what the right avenues to make those things happen are, but I think it would be really cool to see stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Patreon's pretty neat because it also lets prosumers, content creators, they're not beholden to their ad revenue. We had Adpocalypse on YouTube a few years ago, and it shut a lot of creators down, changed their content. But with Patreon and things the like Twitch subs, you're being supported by your community and by other consumers. So I think it allows for a lot more innovation and freedom.
Yeah, I know this podcast is going long, but this is a conversation I kind of wanted to have in a different context, but I think now's really the time to talk about this. I don't know if you saw what Twitch is putting out now, because content creators are prosumers. I think we can back off the use of the term prosumer, because I think everybody's got a pretty good idea at this point. But that's kind of something I was trying to address earlier, is Twitch is doing a kind of an adpocalypse of their own. It's a test right now, but if you're not familiar, Twitch is a live broadcast media service where you can follow a streamer, usually be presented with ads in the middle of a video. If you subscribe to them by paying a certain amount, you can generally watch them without ads. However, they're introducing random midstream ads now that show up in full screen, put your stream in a picture if you're the content creator, and mute your audio, which completely kills a lot of different possibilities for content on there. Live play D&D is a big thing on Twitch right now, and you miss 30 seconds, you might miss a major plot point. If the kids are watching Fortnite, an ad comes up, they might miss like the key point of that match. You have Let's Players who have been working for a certain goal for maybe hours, maybe weeks, and that moment could be ruined by an ad that randomly pops up, and it's nothing the streamer can do about it. The streamer can't determine it, and it's on a per user basis. And the option that the Twitch partner or affiliate has is either I'm going to turn off ads completely and get my revenue from a different source, or I have to manually serve ads on such and such a basis to prevent these mid-roll ads from coming out. And there's a lot of creators who are really worried about what that's going to do. And especially if you're someone who's up and coming and you don't have a Patreon or whatever, you don't have the support to justify starting a Patreon, that's harmful. And that's what I was talking about when I was asking about, are these platforms too big to fail? Do we need alternative marketplaces? And I think we do. It's just, again, starting those things is hard. You need a server farm for most of them, and a lot of people don't have the access to that. That said, there's the home lab community. People who host basically small server farms in their homes, there's some interconnects between them. So maybe people who need a platform and the people who have a platform without really much to have the platform, the hardware, and nothing really hosted on it, maybe those people can get together. Maybe they can democratize that a bit more.
Well, without those midstream ads, how's Jeff Bezos going to keep his lights on?
Oh.
Just set up a different website on Amazon Web Services. This is with money. It's fine.
It's fine.
All right.
I think we've pretty much covered this topic now. What do you think, guys?
I think we're good.
I'm ready for the quiz.
I'm ready for the quiz.
I like the way you had phrased it before. You feel like we're living in the future. And that's kind of really how I feel about this too, being able to go on, learn all the things that you could ever dream of wanting to know about by people who are willingly wanting to share it to you. It's incredibly futuristic, and I love diving into this rabbit hole. I love living in the future.
Yeah, and just to really drive that home, it's like the Jetsons, right? Especially with stuff like 3D printing. You push a button, and then the thing is there. How cool is that?
Well, microwave popcorn is the same thing too. So
yeah, it's like the next step of that, and I'll be interested to see what the next technology that does that is. And I think I want to talk about 3D printing separately because I think that deserves its whole conversation about the uses and whatnot. But yeah, technology is cool. We are living in the future as we saw it as kids, and I think it's fun to think about where we'll go from here and have these discussions. So thank you, Taylor and Jake, for joining us this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a real good time. A lot more fun than I thought it'd be, knowing you.
Thanks.
Can't wait to hear the finished product.
No comment. No, I'm kidding. It was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys, and look forward to being on again.
Do we have any suggestions for topics of things of interest, things to share?
I think it'd be worth looking at the next console generation, maybe because this episode went long, do a shorter one. Look at what's coming out, really dive deep on things like the tech specs, the market that Microsoft and Sony are targeting, and kind of dissect that a bit. Get something a little bit less serious overall, a little bit more fun, and something that we're all generally knowledgeable on. I think that'd be fun if you guys would want to come back and maybe come on the show as a regular thing sometime.
I think I'll sit the console wars out. I'm still on a 360 as my most up-to-date console, so...
I won't promise a topic for next week, but whatever it is will be nerdy or nerd adjacent for sure. If you've made it this far in the episode, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to our ramblings. If you have any suggestions, anything you want us to talk about, anything you might want to come on and talk about if you know us, you can email us at wemightbenerdspod@gmail.com. Get at us on Twitter at mightbenerdspod. And yeah, I think that's it. I don't have. Oh, I do have a recommendation. I almost forgot. We have the AVE YouTube channel that Taylor recommended if you're interested in that. Also, there's a video that I'm going to link on Twitter and in the show notes about the most common vowel in English. It's by a guy called Tom Scott. Super smart guy. Has a series of things you might not have known or things you might not know, and covers all sorts of cool topics, but this one about the most common vowel in English is something I find very interesting. And I think a lot of people would enjoy. Kyle, do we have anything else this week?
I have one personally. I really like diving into rabbit holes on YouTube, and one of them really proves that you just have to be passionate sometimes to be a really good producer. And that one is Steve 1989 MRE Info. It's literally a guy just talking about like old war MREs and war rations and stuff like that. Sometimes these things are hundreds of years, like 100 years old. Sometimes they're current, but he talks about all of them. He opens up a ton of things. He spends a lot of money on this stuff, but his formatting and everything is amazing. It's just really fun to listen to him talk. And sometimes he eats 100-year-old stuff. I just watched a video where he smoked a 120-year-old cigarette.
Holy cow, that actually sounds...
Is that his last video?
I think it is the second to last video that he's done. Oh, no.
It's not his.
It takes a month to upload stuff because he's trying to get over botulism. But no, seriously, that channel is absolutely amazing, and I would absolutely recommend it to anyone. It's a lot of fun. That's Steve 1989 MRE Info.
It sounds worth checking out for sure. Again, we love rabbit holes. That's what we do. But I think we're done this week. Again, thank you, Taylor and Jake, for joining us. We hope you'll join us again sometime. I'm Dylan Critchfield.
I'm Kyle Montgomery.
And if you enjoyed this episode, you might be a nerd too. We'll see you next time.